Welcome, welcome. My name is Aoife, and I am a mind body coach. I help sensitive women to heal themselves from chronic pain, chronic illness, anxiety, and depression using the mind body connection because that is what I use to heal myself from 30 years of incurable diagnosis. So today I'm super excited. I have Tanner Murtagh. Welcome, Tanner. Tanner is a social worker and therapist who treats people with chronic pain and illness. He is the director of Pain Psychotherapy Canada and co-director of Mind Body or MBody Community.
Got it. Yeah.
Yeah. Through his agencies, he is supporting people healing with neuroplastic pain and symptoms. So, welcome, Tanner. Thank you so much for being here. I'm really buzzed for this conversation.
Yeah. Thank you for having me on.
Cool. Well, yeah, I'm just dying to know your story and what brought you to the mind-body connection. Was it your own symptoms? What was your kind of moment?
Yeah. So it was my own symptoms. I feel like that's a common story with a lot of coaches and therapists in this space. I had, I started to develop so I had chronic pain, like pretty chronic, widespread pain. That developed, when was this? Probably in my like early 20s. Over a decade ago. And yeah, like I think I always tell people, that all of a sudden have chronic pain, chronic symptoms start to develop. Like it's not like the journey just starts like at the moment that the symptoms click on. Like I think that's how people view it sometimes. Like my pain started when I was 35 years old. Like like that's what took place. But as we know with neuroplastic pain, neuroplastic symptoms, mind body symptoms, that they kind of develop over a lifetime, right? Like it's not like one moment. Like I have worked with some people where it's like one intense trauma happened, but that's like a pretty rare occurrence. And so even for myself, like I think back on like my childhood, like I was definitely like a sensitive kid overall. Like big emotions. I have a 7-year-old son. He's exactly like this. Like big emotions, sensitive. Some of those like ways of coping like developed pretty early on for me. So like being perfectionistic, definitely some excessive control, excessive people pleasing was definitely a part of that. And then early in like my teenage years, the way that I coped is I became addicted to like drugs and alcohol, pretty severely. So that probably started when I was, I don't know, 14 or 15 years old, and kind of just took off from there. I think by close to my 18th birthday, like things had escalated to a pretty large degree just with my drug and alcohol abuse. And so as a result, like I was placed in like a mandated like drug and alcohol treatment center, which was a great place to be honest. I wasn't stoked to be there at the beginning, but when we talk about, even the work we do with chronic pain, chronic symptoms, there was a lot of crossover when you're treating someone with addiction concerns, such as myself. Like a big part is like connecting to emotions, learning to work through emotions, working through past trauma, like all sorts of things. And I got better, and I've been sober ever since that. So it's been quite a few years since then. Um, but it's interesting because I think a lot of people maybe internalize some of that healing work they were doing in that treatment center a bit more than me. So when I got out of treatment, I was 18, almost 19 years old. And then my life kind of restarted. I went to university, and all of a sudden I'm in university. I become perfectionistic again. Things get super serious. I'm being super controlling, not attending to my body, not attending to emotions. And a big shift happened. Like I changed my major in school, and then all of a sudden I started to get pain. And so I'm like a pretty active guy. At the time, I was training for like my first triathlon with a friend, if you want to talk about type A, but I started to experience pain in my right knee. And I think there might have been like a slight injury because it did swell for briefly because I was running a lot. Like I was running 50 or 60 kilometers a week. So there was some swelling. But then the swelling went down. But then the pain never went away. So the pain stayed in my right knee. And basically, the period of time, I know there's lots of people out there who've been in chronic pain or symptoms much longer than I was, but it was probably about 3.5 years looking back when my symptoms became chronic, and it spread. So it went from my right knee, then to my left knee, and then to my shoulder, and then to my other shoulder. And eventually it was pretty widespread. My worst pain was probably, well, worst or most debilitating was probably like my back and hips. And as the pain escalated, my mental health just worsened, like it just plummeted. So I became incredibly anxious about my pain. More of this kind of like fight or flight response taking place, especially early on. And I did everything to try and fix it and figure it out, like many people do. You know, you have something unpleasant going on in your body. We're kind of taught in our medicalized society, like go to the medical system, get things figured out. So I went to like countless specialists, doctors, um, every treatment imaginable outside of like surgery, and nothing was getting better. In fact, over the 3.5 years, my pain just got worse and worse and spread to new areas. And by the end of it, like I was just very shut down. You know, a concept that we talk about at our clinic is what we call like sensitization trauma. You won't hear this term anywhere else. It's a term that we use, but you think about when chronic pain and symptoms happen, we know this is often central sensitization, right? Like you're really dysregulated. As a result, your nervous system becomes sensitized. It starts to produce chronic pain, chronic symptoms. There's no physical cause. There's nothing wrong with your body. But one thing that happens to people as chronic pain and symptoms happen is they almost have this like trauma response to them, where like they have, and what I mean by that is like this prolonged state of like fight, like angry, frustrated, flight, anxious, or freeze, kind of shut down mode where people feel hopeless, helpless, numb. And this happens for a lot of people. They have this like sensitization trauma response. And then when we have the trauma response to the symptoms, it just escalates even further. And so, like, when I think about my own journey, like, I think that really took place. The longer it went on, the more dysregulated I became about it, the worse the symptoms got. And so when things started to shift for me was probably like many people that probably listen to your channel as well as mine, like they've heard of Dr. Sarno, who was a doctor in the 70s and 80s who really started to understand that, you know, chronic pain, chronic symptoms are often not physical in nature. Like I think a lot of the work we do really starts back there, and we've got great innovation and treatments that have come out since then. But that's where I started. Like I read the book, one of his books. Was angry about the book. I think I threw the book. Like it wasn't like I wasn't like sold. And the funny part looking back is like I was training to be a therapist at the time. So you learn this in university and therapy school that and maybe not to the level that we should, but that you know trauma dysregulation can actually trigger chronic pain or symptoms in the brain. But I just had no openness to it. Like there was like I remember when I first, yeah, read the book, there was just no openness. I was like, there's no way. My symptoms are way too extreme. They're way too widespread. I had all these diagnoses that doctors had given me. And there was some like debate around what was wrong with me, but as you probably know, every new specialist you go to, like they're convincing you that there's this other thing wrong with your body, some imbalance. Some doctors were saying I had fibro, like it was just all over the map. So I was so medicalized about the symptoms that there was very little openness. Interestingly, like my friends, many of my friends are also therapists, and my partner, she's also a therapist. They were like pretty sold like right away. Like they knew, like they were very aware that there was nothing going on with my body, and they were gentle, moving me in that direction. But that kind of gave me the motivation that this is what was taking place, is that it was neuroplastic, that my body was okay, my brain and nervous system had just been in this heightened state of danger and survival for a long period of time. And then I started to do the work. So I read a number of different books. Dr. Sarno, Dr. Schuberner's book was out around the time when I was first healing. And luckily, I was a therapist, so I knew a lot of these techniques. Like I knew how to work with emotions. I wasn't doing that, but I knew how to. And so I started doing that. I started to meditate. Did a bit of journaling, a lot of like somatic work as well with my symptoms. And I'm cautious even saying on podcasts or channels like how long it took me, because everyone gets so locked in of, well, it took Tanner this long, so it should take me this long. Uh, and so for the listeners, like everyone's healing is different. Like everyone's healing um, has a different trajectory of how long it takes. For myself, it wasn't instant. Like I've worked with people where, within 3 or 4 weeks, like they've had tremendous change. That wasn't the case. It took me about 4 months of doing consistent work where my symptoms just lowered consistently over time. I think at about that 4 month mark, my symptoms were no longer chronic, I would say. Like I was still having flares now and then, but they weren't like chronic daily anymore. The one thing that was really quite a bit of work for me is like even after that 4 months, for the next 4 or 5 months, I had to like recondition myself to start get exposure to movement or get exposure to activities or get exposure to life, because by the end of it, like I wasn't moving. I was terrified movement was causing all my symptoms. So at the end of my healing, like in the last 6 months, like I wasn't working. I was scared to walk more than like 5 minutes, scared to use my arms. So my world had shrunk so much. And even though I was like not having chronic symptoms anymore, there was still a lot of fear that I had to work through to widen my world and to get back to being like really active. So that took me another 4 or 5 months to really consistently do that exposure work, with all of these conditioned responses that I basically developed as a result of my pain. But yeah, this is my long answer to your question, but this is really what drove me to do the work that I do, at my companies, and with people, because at the time when I was healing, there was nothing in Canada. Like there wasn't a therapist, there wasn't a doctor, there wasn't even coaches, like there wasn't anything that I could like get support with. And still, like I think Canada's like pretty far behind compared to other countries in some of this. But essentially, I'm doing my best to try to push this movement along in our country. Yeah.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing all of that. I, per usual, can relate to so much that you share. Also, I had a drink and drug. I didn't go into treatment for it, but I really abused drink and drugs in my teens and late and early 20s. And yeah, I can just link that all in, to be honest, for me into my journey of suppressing pain and it manifesting in different ways. And actually, interestingly enough, for me, when I quit drugs and alcohol, and I drink now, I'm not like completely sober or anything, but I did get to a point where I was like, okay, I need to do something really drastic now, and I did quit. That is for me, even though I had IBS and pain symptoms my whole life, these symptoms, even though I was like living this super healthy life, sugar-free, gluten-free, dairy-free, not smoking, not drinking, I began to get more and more symptoms in my body. It was almost like a symptom imperative for me because I didn't have drugs or alcohol to numb things out. So everything was like really like boiling up and out of me. And I just loved what you were sharing. You had a term for it about like the sensitization and this like kind of trauma response to your own symptoms. And I always say to clients, like, you're just so valid to be having those kinds of responses to your symptoms because you're experiencing these extreme symptoms and you're not being seen or heard or held or helped with them. Like that is really scary. And that's why then the hypervigilance just like gets fed so much. And then maybe the people around you are just getting like worn down, or you think they're getting worn down, or people and you then learn, okay, gotta kind of hide it. And the burden and the hypervigilance, it really just keeps feeding this that system, let's say, that's creating or generating or adding to all of the symptoms. So I just really love how you touched on that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, like I think it's an important piece because um, when we think about, for example, most people have heard probably on your channels of like pain reprocessing therapy, which is really effective. It works. We know this. But I think sometimes people misinterpret what takes place when they try to incorporate pain reprocessing therapy because essentially pain reprocessing therapy, the idea is that you change the emotional response, the nervous system response to your pain or symptoms, right? Sounds great. So you learn how to respond more calmly, more ease, more lightness, more curiosity. And I think it's essential that we get there. Like I think we can, it's hard to heal when we have so much fear and dysregulation about the actual sensations of symptoms. But I think you can't skip over this whole trauma response that you've had to your symptoms for X a number of years. Like I think we want to get to the light, easy, curious attitude, but that often means like we need to process and work through this trauma response that we've had. And so I agree with you. Yeah, like when I'm working with people, like I think it's an essential part of treatment because it'll be impossible to just flip over to light and at ease when this has kind of taken place and this has been your response to your symptoms for so long. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And just using the most simple, there's all kinds of different tools that you can use, but essentially it's just, yeah, creating a um a way of like interrupting that response and introducing a safety feeling. This is how I use it anyway. And then over time, I always say to my clients, you're just chipping away at that old response or that old story and just gently changing the narrative to something that like is way more hopeful, let's face it, than most of the things that you may have been told your whole life by like medical systems or doctors or well-meaning alternative therapists. I was told all kinds of things. So yeah, and of course I can relate also to your world becoming so small. I was scared of food. I mentioned a few minutes ago how I went on this like super, you mentioned that you went into the athletes. I went into the like meditating and gluten-free, sugar-free, all the food stuff because IBS and severe debilitating stomach issues were one of the many symptoms that I had. And it made sense to point at food. That's what's going in your stomach. And there's so much information out there about food and diets and gut healing protocols and everything. So I went really extreme down that route under the idea that, after 6 months of doing this particular protocol, I would be like stronger and healthier and better to start to go back out into the world. But as the years went by, I was just getting more and more fearful. That's just what was happening. And my world was getting smaller and smaller, and I was getting more and more back into this corner. And eventually I did have to stop working as well. And so yeah, I having that journey, and I think so many people who start this healing journey of like uh it's first, like we mentioned, just changing that response to your symptoms and getting that initial kind of relief. But then it is like, how do I get back out into the world? Like For
Yeah.
me, I did kind of like you were talking about that instant healing. Like I have both sides of this. Like I did have a very miraculous breakthrough with the food thing,
Yeah.
but I think like you, there was no coaches, no teachers, nothing. I just had this app on my phone and a couple of books that I'd read, and I just had this like fierce determination, and I kind of just like almost like bullied my own brain into I was just like, no, like this is over. This food, like it's over. I'm gone, it's gone, like I'm done. And I walked into a shop and I bought this food I hadn't eaten, these ice creams or whatever in years, and I ate them. And so I did break free from IBS of 30 years, like in a very dramatic way. But that was not like I wasn't like healed in 2 weeks. It's like I am still on this journey of expanding and growing and healing. Like I will forever be on this journey. But yeah,
Yeah.
so people also have their own journey to going back out. What are your triggers? What are your fears? What have you been backed into a corner with? And like that journey of getting back into life is where it's all at.
Yeah. And I think one thing you said there that's that's so important to understand is like people seeing like how they've kind of shrunk their world. Because similar to yourself, like something I did, I went gluten free. I was like convinced, oh, being gluten free is gonna like heal my pain. I did the paleo diet. Yeah, and none of these diets are necessarily bad for you. Like it's just the reality is like why doing them. And one activity that I talk to almost every person I work with about is what we call like the pain or symptom rule book. And so essentially you understand it like this is exactly what we're talking about. Over time, as you have chronic pain, chronic IBS, whatever it is, you create this huge rule book. And the rule book is made up of things you do or don't do because you are convinced that that is going to reduce your symptoms or heal you. Make sense? So, like an example of like some of the do rules would be do 90 minutes of hot yoga a day, right? Because that's somehow going to like help. Stretch for half an hour every morning. You know, only eat foods that are like high in antioxidants. Like there's all these do rules. There's all these things that people do because they're convinced that that's going to keep their symptoms or at bay or are convinced that that's going to heal them. There's also a whole bunch of things you don't do, right? Same thing goes with food. Like don't eat gluten. Uh, don't, whatever it might be. I was convinced don't walk for more than 5 minutes. Don't sit on couches because that's going to mess up your spine in some way. And it sounds, this rule book, it can get so massive. And the problem is that people, it almost becomes unconscious. Like when I was first healing, there were some rules that were obvious, like don't walk for 5 minutes. Like I had to break that over time to actually fully live. But there was all these little rules that I had built up of that I had forgotten about. I was still engaging in them. But at one point I was convinced, this is going to help reduce my pain. So I just added it to the routine. And so the rule book gets so massive and there's so much avoidance in whether you're doing things or not doing things that that needs to be broken down to actually fully heal as you're kind of talking about in your own experience too. Like that needs to be broken down. Like we need to start actually starting to break those rules and to widen our world. Now I want to be cautious for people listening. You got to grade this for the most part. Like every once in a while, I'd have breakthroughs and I'd go and do something spontaneous and work out great. But for lots of people, it just needs to be graded of like slowly. Like don't go and break your whole rule book in 2 days. Like that's gonna be incredibly overwhelming to your nervous system. Um, so it's a balance, right? And it's different for person to person, but it's a balance of like how fast do I break these rules? And if you go too slow, it's going to take you 80 years. And if you go too fast, you're going to get a lot of flares taking place. And the flares are going to happen not because your body's damaged, it's just your brain has been so convinced that, I need to not do this or else. Like it's been so convinced to view these things as dangerous that as you go and break the rules, it's not going to be smooth sailing. Like there's going to be flares and bumpiness. But that's the idea. Like we need to slowly wade through that bumpiness so that we can have this full life, so that our brain can learn, hey, we're actually safe to live fully. Yeah.
I am obsessed with this rule book thing. I never even like tied it all up like that, but I was just living with this really, really big, really intense rule book of do's and don'ts. And the thing is, not only does your world become super small, you're just you're so not yourself. Like you're so out of trust with yourself. You're just living like ping, 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 ping. That's a do rule, that's a don't rule that you read or someone told you. Like none of that information in that book is actually coming from inside of you, from your soul, from your intuition, from you knowing your true self and your true own potential. Um, or even like your preferences, it's like I was going around eating this gluten-free bread, pretending I liked all this food for so long. It's like I was overriding all of my system preferences and saying, yeah, I'm okay living the rest of my life like this. When I'm like, so the
Yeah.
journey of like let's say like unpacking that rule book is really a journey back to yourself and your and back to like trust learning to know and trust yourself deeply again. And so I love what you were saying, like it really is different for different people, and you mentioned spontaneity. And I always say to my clients when they always say like, so when can I like introduce this food or this movement or how do I do it? And of course they have like tools and guidance. But I also was just saying like, trust yourself. Like for me, I just woke up one day and I honestly, there was this spontaneity within me. There was this excitement. There was this like, that and I wanted to go and I wanted to basically eat ice cream and eat these foods and the fear because of the information I had been consuming and some of the tools I had been trying, from the app or whatever, that I had like significantly reduced the fear myself. So I was like, even if I eat this ice cream, even if I have like a terrible night's sleep, I don't really care as much anymore because I really get this. I really, even though doubt will come and go, it's not like I believed it all the time. It's just like there was something within me. There was a resilience, a trust. There was something. There was a momentum building within me that I could be spontaneous by introducing myself back out into the world and breaking my own rule book.
Yeah, and yeah, there's a lot in there that you said that I want to speak to. I think totally, like I think you're building trust in yourself again. And and I don't say that lightly. That's hard to do when we've been terrified to do anything and everything. And so we start to live in this very inauthentic way. And no one's to blame for that. I want to be dead clear. You're not to like if you're listening, I'm not blaming you for living that way. I totally get it. And it makes sense. This is how we respond to unpleasant things inside. We avoid anything that's bad and we move towards anything that feels good. Like we're not that we're complex as human beings, but it's just a simple way that human beings are kind of built. And it's just, yeah, like it basically sucks all the joy out of our life. The bigger the rule book gets, it sucks all the joy, it sucks all the things that you authentically want. And yeah, it's a balance. Like it's a weird one where, like, for example, with walking, it was very graded because there was so much fear that at first I remember I'd walk back and forth in we lived in a basement suite at the time and it wasn't that big, but I'd walk back and forth for 5 minutes and then sit down and regulate and do the somatic work. And eventually I could go outside and at first it was graded. After I got to like 30 minutes, I felt pretty confident. But what you're saying is sometimes it's spontaneous. Like I remember I went on my honeymoon with my partner. Um, this was probably maybe like 2, 3 months into healing. Like I wasn't that far in. And I loved ping pong. And there was like ping pong tournaments at this thing. And I remember just being like, screw it. Like I don't care. Like and it was great. Like and ping pong like the thing is it's really jagged movements. You're running after the ball. Like there's a lot of things in there that I had not. But that spontaneous moment of like basically being in these my poor partner, I played ping pong like every afternoon on our honeymoon for like for like a whole week. But and I barely felt an increase in symptoms. And so like it was just that moment hit, and that spontaneous moment like sped up everything. I still had to grade some things intentionally, but like those spontaneous moments, as you start to understand this, you start to work with it, you start to identify it, like they'll happen over time, right? Like you don't have to force it along, like just kind of consistently do the work. Everyone has these spontaneous moments that speed things up over time. So I think there's a lot of benefits to starting to do that. And I think the one thing that you mentioned a while ago is by starting to break the rule book, you actually learn what the real triggers are. And this is really important. Like you actually realize what the real rules are. Because I want to be clear here, there are some real rules. They are nothing, if your pain or symptoms are neuroplastic, they are nothing to do with your body being damaged. But for example, a great rule of mine, the number one trigger for symptoms, I don't have symptoms anymore, but a few times a year, I will push the line, and pressure and perfectionism is a real trigger. And I'll never unlearn that. That is like a meaningful message from my brain and nervous system being like, whoa, this is way too much. That's a real trigger. Like that is a trigger that over the last 9 or 10 years has been consistent, but I never knew that when I was first healing until I shrunk this rule book. I broke them all down, and then I actually learned what my actual triggers were, right? And pressure, perfectionism, pushing the line too far in that direction is a real trigger that I have to be aware of. I don't keep my life small out of fear of it, but I just know that it just increases the level of danger I feel way too much.
I love it. And these things you don't need to fix about yourself, right? They're like, I get all kinds of sensations when I'm growing or when like periods of growth in my business or personal. And also, I'm always still healing and recognizing patterns within my family or my life and how things are playing out. And um, yeah, so these are sensations that I don't need to fix and I don't need to change, but I do need to know how to respond to and read and how to care for. And there are always opportunities for me to just get to know myself better. And I also love back to the ping pong story, which I'm obsessed with because there was fun in it for you, right? And so when I say I broke free from my IBS, right? I hadn't eaten sugar or bread or like anything for 6 years, right? And I decided one day to walk to my local shop and buy a packet of Mars ice creams and a six pack of Guinness. And I ate that ice cream. So for me, that was pure, like that was hilarious. It was so funny. I walked into a friend's house for her birthday, took out ice cream, started eating in front of everyone. Everyone's like, "What?" There was so much humor and fun and playfulness in that moment. So for me, that sped things up and it made it fast. Um, but you, like you said, you don't have to force that. You can't force that. You just have to get to this like random moment where there's the fear's been lowered, the information is in the system is different, and you feel like there's an opportunity for fun, and like fun and joy will fire and wire new neural pathways, just like ping, 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 ping. Like,
It's like all these factors converged exactly as you're saying. And I think um, yeah, it's one of these ones where, when I talk to people about breaking your rule book, overcoming things, widening your world, don't make it super serious, people. I get it. I'm great at making my life super serious really quick. There's few things I am as good at in life as making things serious. I'm great at that. My nervous system doesn't enjoy it, but I'm really good in that direction. I have to be really cautious of that. And so it's easy when we're perfectionistic, we put a lot of pressure on ourselves, we're self-critical that you're like, oh, great, I have all these rules to break. And then people make it so serious. And like every time that happened to me, it was steps backwards I was taking. Like even when I was walking, like walking for 5 minutes wasn't fun, but I would be imagining like all the things I would get to do if I could walk. Like all the things I could go and do if I could walk an hour. and that was fun, even just imagining that, right? So like I think, yeah, we just have to be careful with the ways that we cope often when we have neuroplastic pain or symptoms, that we're not making everything super serious about the healing. I do have a funny story for you. Here's a regret that I have looking back. It's kind of funny now, but so I was gluten free for 3.5, 4 years. I don't know, give or take. Here's the thing though, is I didn't actually break this rule when I healed. So the funniest thing, well, looking back, it's funny, but I regret all the years I didn't eat real bread. But when I came to like a mind body approach, a brain and nervous system approach, when I first started it, it was right around the time I went gluten free. So you can see what happened here. I use the mind body approach, I get better. But in the back of my mind, I'm like, well, I became gluten free like 2 weeks before. Like maybe the gluten's doing something. Like maybe. So I was healed. I didn't eat gluten for 3.5, 4 years after being healed. Um, and I, similar to yourself, I convinced myself that gluten-free bread tasted good, which it doesn't. And I want to be clear, like there are people with celiac, so like of course, like there's real reasons to be gluten-free. A bunch of my family celiac, hence why I was bought into this idea. But I wasn't. But yeah, like I that rule went on for so long, and I became pain and symptom free still. So you don't have to break all the rules necessarily. However, that rule doesn't sound like much, but it did suck some joy out of my life for 3.5 years. So it's just you're breaking the rules not just to overcome your pain or symptoms, but it's so that you can live fully, so that you can like do the things that you want to do. So I think it's really essential to start to push the line as we're talking about.
Well, I actually love that you shared that story for a reason as well, because a lot of my clients come to me and they're like, well, I'm healing, but I'm still gluten free. Is that wrong? And I love what you shared because it's like, no, dude, like you can drop these rules, whatever timeline those rules are on,
Yeah.
and you can still be healing and you can still be growing. And so a lot of these things can just have their own moment and have their own time, and you're just going to be chipping away at it, and things just go pop in their own time. And I just love also how you were talking about bringing the lightness in. And it's like it's been so heavy, whoever's out there listening, and it's so heavy to have gone through and to be going through what you're going through, and just starting to bring those droplets of joy and excitement. So before I even found the mind body, I started to imagine that I could like eat a fish and chips and be like go out for dinner and be normal, and how like fun that would be. And so yeah, I always encourage someone, it's just simple tool to have, but like you said, just imagine like what it could be like. One of my clients imagines getting on a plane and flying across America to hug her brother, and just imagine that hug. Like it's such a simple, meaningful thing to be able to do, share a meal with someone, to hug someone you love. Just get excited about that, and yeah, and just let the lightness back in, definitely.
Yeah, it's important, like don't lose sight of why you're doing it, because you're not just breaking the rules to be pain or symptom free. Like that's not the only goal. That's not the, you know what I mean? Like it's great being pain and symptom free, but there's a reason you want to be pain and symptom free. And like it's like don't lose sight of that. I think it's so easy for us to lose sight of it when we've had debilitating symptoms for so long, because all we can imagine and hope for is that these symptoms go away. But that's often not a good enough goal. Like it's like what would you be doing in life? Like what would you be working towards passionately? Like what would your relationships be like? Like what trips would you go on? What gluten-free bread would you, or gluten or not gluten-free bread would you eat? Like whatever it is, like you need the goal in mind of what you're working towards to kind of motivate yourself.
It's set the bar higher. Don't just set the bar at like getting symptom free, set the bar higher for yourself of like what you want to, how you want to be feeling.
exactly.
I love this so much, and I'm conscious that you have another call to get on. So, is there anything that you want to share specifically about your work or about your journey, or say to anyone who's listening?
Yeah, so I think and I know we're going to talk again next week because I'm interviewing you on my channel, but I have a lot of different services. Some of them are free. Obviously, I'm a therapist in Canada, so I'm only able, like my agency's only able to work with in certain provinces in Canada. That's just the reality of kind of the regulations. But they can, and I'll send you the links after, but they can check out the Pain Psychotherapy site. Um, so I have like a YouTube channel. I have a podcast that I do with my partner, which is pretty goofy and fun, but lots of good information there. Um, and then, yeah, I do have a digital course through our other agency, MBody Community, which has a lot of education and practices and things that people could check out too. So I think that's all there is in terms of the different services that I offer. But yeah, there's lots of free content so people can kind of just learn more. And even on my YouTube channel, I have lots of free practices people can go and try out and play around with to see if it's a good fit for them.
I love that. And I'm going to share all of your details in the description anyway, so everyone can find you. And yeah, just thank you so much for your work and for being open about your journey and all the wisdom that you have to share. It's just so valuable and it's so fun. And yeah, it's been a pleasure to chat with you.
Yeah, it was nice chatting with you too.
Cool. And oh yeah, I must say like and subscribe because I never say that. So like and subscribe and put any questions that you have in the comment box. And you can find me at my website and you can book a free call with me if you want to know more about my work. Lots of love to everyone.